Am I good to share my screen or do you?
You're good to share. And then whenever you're ready to get started, go for it.
Hi, everybody. Good morning.
Good morning. Yeah, because it's gonna have to.
All right, guys. So before we get started, I just want to put that up on the board. You can either use the link or the QR code. That's a wakelet that contains a lot of the things we're talking about and additional resources as well. So we're going to be talking about a lot of things that relate to design today. And it's a lot to take in without diving into any particular tool besides like the two that we're covering. So I just want to make sure that you have it to reference later. Everything that we talk about today is going to be research-based. And so there's a lot of links to the research as well if you want to reference it and use it later as well. So all of that's in the wakelet. You do need to like scroll to the side. It has a lot of columns in it, so just keep that in mind. But anyway, my name is Lindsay Kraus. Good morning. And I am an instructional technology coach for Prince William County. I work at Gainesville Middle School, so I'm in Gainesville, Virginia. And I used to be an 8th grade English teacher for a bunch of years. And then I transitioned into the ITC position. This is my 2nd year.
Hi, and my name is Chelsea Lau. I am an 8th grade language arts teacher at Gainesville Middle School. And luckily I get to work very closely with Ms. Kraus.
Yeah, we worked together for a while. We came in at about the same time. So today we're going to be talking about design principles. And this is a topic that can get really in depth really quickly. And so we're going to be covering what you need to know as educators for the typical things that educators use for design, like presentations or on an LMS or materials for students. So we're going to have that kind of focus today because you can definitely go down a rabbit hole, but we can't do all that in an hour. So that's where we're going to be on. Do you guys need more time for the link? I'll give you a second.
Before we deep dive into this, we are guilty of all of these bad things that are on here and did not know what we were doing. And doing research.
The do's and
The
don'ts.
do's and don'ts.
Yeah,
I should say.
we've done a lot of don'ts.
So, let's do it that way. We definitely violated some of these.
Yeah. You learn. It's a learning process for sure, but it is an important one. Is everybody good with the resources or do they need a second?
I don't know that. I can't get that, where that link is to work on my computer.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm getting
Is
this.
this?
Yeah,
Is that what you're getting too? I'm getting.
guys, I copied and pasted from Wakelet.
I
What
copied it and got that on
Let's see.
my,
Huh?
I did use that and got it on my computer.
The QR code works, but I can't access it to my computer.
It's case sensitive. if anybody-
Oh, is it case sensitive?
It's case
Yeah, I
sensitive.
did it.
That's right, you were in here. Do you have that link on Sketch?
I do. It's on Sketch. It's on, there's a PDF with all the links from our stuff today. Let's see. Let's share. Copy and paste it, and I'll do it again. Same thing. It's weird. It might be case sensitive. My mouse is going crazy right now.
Like that X and the L or.
Yeah, I
something.
capitalized the X and the L and the I.
Hey guys, for anybody who might want to try, this is just me being, I guess, selfish, maybe trying to push the process along. I did make a bit.ly to the presenter's PDF, which, can you tell me, would that wakelet be in your
Yeah,
PDF that you
It should be in
posted?
there.
So the bit.ly link, bit.ly/945mil, capital M. bit.ly/945mil with a capital M. I hope that'll work for you.
But in Sketch, there's a PDF that has links to everything that we're going through today, so you might be able to access it that way better. All right, so what we're gonna be going over today is design. So like I said, design and education. So we're gonna be breaking it down into just 4 things. So talking about color, text, visuals, and layout. And then there's supplemental resources on the wakelet, but we're gonna be doing a process for, I'll just show you. the what, why, and how for all of these things. So that means you know the key principles behind that particular element of design, and then the research behind it, and then how you can actually use that in an educational setting. So that's the format we're going to be using today. Anything that we share or give you guys today, you're welcome to use in your own settings and share with anybody for them to use. So everything's good to go. All right, so the first thing we're going to be talking about today is color. It's one of the most important things when you're designing anything. So when we say design, we're talking about anything that you create for other people to see. Sometimes that's just writing something in your LMS like Canvas. Sometimes that's creating a PowerPoint. Sometimes it's creating an infographic or a poster or a flyer. Design applies to anything that you create, whether it's on a computer, which is what we're focusing on today, or just by hand. So that's when we talk about design, that's what we're talking about. So color and design. There's a lot of mistakes that happen when it comes to color that we don't realize that we're making. And like we said before, we're probably the most guilty of it. So when we talk about color, all these up. We're talking about color. One of the most important things you guys have to think about is contrast. So when we talk about contrast, we're talking about having opposites, lights and darks. And the reason that we do that is so we're able to see something. So if you have something that is low contrast, like a light blue background with a slightly lighter blue or darker blue text, it is really difficult to see. And so creating as much contrast as you can is important. So on this screen here, you're going to see the most contrast you can have, a white background with black text. When we're talking about education, this is the gold standard. So while the other things can be prettier, this is the most accessible for your students, and it is the easiest to read, and it helps them retain the best for the most part. So while it's not as fun, you can still make it fun. So we're trying to model what that looks like in our presentation as well, because we use presentations to teach students, to teach teachers, to teach each other, delivering information, right? So the whole point of giving a presentation is to get that information across, and we're looking at doing it the best way possible. So in addition to that, using a consistent layout for whatever you're using. So if you're doing a presentation or a Canvas course, having the same colors throughout, just having a palette is important because it actually reduces distraction. So when the kids aren't looking for all the different colors and bells and whistles, it becomes part of the background in their mind, and they focus better on the content. And that actually is research-based as well. So choosing a color palette, and we'll be showing you at the end how easy that can be. You don't have to be a graphic designer to choose a palette. There's a lot of resources out there that actually already do it for you. If you've ever used a theme in PowerPoint or Google Slides, they already have a palette chosen for you. And I'll be giving you resources for how to find that as well. So that's usually about 3 to 5 colors. But also think about who's going to be viewing it. So when we talk about any of these design elements, including color, we're talking about making sure everybody has access to the information that you give. And that means that you have to consider UDL, Universal Design Learning. That's what it stands for. Actually, I haven't thought about what it stands for in a long time. So we're going to be considering our audiences and the fact that everybody needs equal access to the information that we're giving. And so all of these try to follow those practices. All right, so here's an example of high contrast and low contrast.
Yeah, so our example up here of high contrast and low contrast is pretty easy to see where our deficits are. And sometimes we're guilty of doing this because we don't put it up to present it in front of us on our screen, it looks fine. But then when you present it in a room like this or with your students, you don't notice that the contrast is not enough for that it's going to impact your students. A lot of what I found last year was in front of my screen would work, but on Zoom, things would look differently. So a lot of my PowerPoints I had created with, fun backgrounds and, KG fonts, which we'll talk about later. I realized that it was difficult for my students to kind of decipher those on their little screens at home. Our kids were on iPads, things like that. So I had to go back and think about what is this going to look like in all different mediums.
Yeah. And especially because not all laptops are the same as well, or they might be using a tablet or a phone, and all of them have different settings on their screen. And students might be setting it differently as well, depending on whatever learning differences they have. they might be using an accessibility feature. And so when you don't have enough contrast, it gets really difficult. There actually is a website that allows you to look into the contrast of the colors that you're using, and I put that in the Wakelet. And it's really helpful if you're looking to see, but if you have any doubts, just go black and white. Even a black background with a white text is better than having a bunch of colors when it comes to the text on your screen. So here's an example of a fail. So they're trying to say nothing is impossible, but as you can see, because of the low contrast of the font color, it's saying nothing is possible. So it's an example of a fail. That's a book cover, I believe.
It's very encouraging while you're going down one.
Here's another one that the student, oh, no, not this one. So this one, it's saying graphic design is my passion. Here, there's a really low contrast between the text and the background. So before I had said how having a white background is best, this is one of the reasons for that. They could have put a background on the text itself just to be able to see it better, but just having it on those images really does make it difficult for kids to see.
And we'll talk later about the unnecessary images.
Yeah. All right, so there's actually a lot of research behind the colors that we use. There's something called digital eye strain, and it's a thing. They're researching it more and more now that we're in blended learning, right? And so there are ways to avoid some of the strain that our eyes have noticed. I don't know about anybody else, but I had to change my glasses in the past year. I added the blue light filter and all that kind of stuff. The eye strain's a real thing. So having high contrast reduces that strain. If you've ever seen a PowerPoint that has a neon background, what's the first thing that happens? Everybody goes like this, they have a headache, they don't want to see it, right? What's the point of creating a presentation if your kids don't even want to see it, or the teachers don't want to see it? It doesn't help. So just guiding the eye and using something that's less distracting really puts the focus on the content and not the design. So you want your design to be subtle. It also helps establish patterns for students, which is super important. We know the benefits of patterns for students. We know how they think, we know that we're educators, but sometimes color isn't considered in that, and it needs to be, because having a consistent color pattern also, like I said before, reduces that confusion and just puts the focus on the content. So we talked about how we're going to apply this as well. When it comes to color, just using a theme or design template tends to add that consistency that you need, and a lot of them are already research-based. So if you look at the Wakelet, there's a column for presentations, and in there's a website called Slides Carnival. So they are a website that provides free templates for PowerPoints in Google, and they use a lot of really good design principles in order to make them, and they're all very consistent. So they all use the same layouts and things like that. So if you want to add some pizzazz to your slides, but you want to make sure they're accessible, you'll have to take some of what you learned today to be more discerning, because you're presenting to students and you're having them learn instead of just like presenting, but it's a good resource if you want to still make it fun, or you don't want to have to think about the design necessarily behind all of that and just start from somewhere. So I actually used one of those for my template here so that you can see what that looked like. So this is from Slides Carnival. So I just imported it right into Google. Also, don't use graphic backgrounds. So anything that you create, whether it's a button or an infographic or a presentation, using a graphic background is a no-no. It makes it inaccessible. Yeah, very distracting as well. It gets busy. So we're going for simplicity when it comes to design for students. I'm going to show you what that looks like in a minute. I'll let you go over this.
Okay, so color is in graph and charts. This is something, I went through grad school for educational technology, like many of you may have in the room, and I took the design courses. And this was one thing that was discussed, and I immediately was like, oh, I am very guilty of doing this when I want to spice up my PowerPoints or data or things like that I think are kind of boring, and I want to make it fun for my students. So graphs and charts, we're trying to implement those more in our instruction. If you teach pretty much any subject, is you want students to be able to analyze those and understand them. Many of our state standards say interpret and analyze charts. So when you're doing that, black and white is preferred. Even though when you go into PowerPoint, there's the options to spice it up and add different things to it, black and white is preferred. You can also use patterns, which is possible, but we'll talk about, we'll show you some
Show you
examples.
some examples
And then
of
the
these I
best
like.
thing to do is to also make sure that you have those text labels for your students that may be colorblind. So here's some examples.
So this is this was a colorful graph that you would see when a student's colorblind.
Yes, so this is a student, if they were colorblind, and they were looking at the two, you can see on the left side, it would be difficult for them to kind of decipher the difference between homework and midterms and so on. So this wouldn't be a useful graph for them. To you, or to an individual that is not colorblind, they could easily kind of just figure it out, except for those two there, obviously. But it would be a little easier to decipher, but for our colorblind students, it becomes really difficult. And that's something I had never really thought about before I went through the program. Now, if we go to the next slide, you can see in this one, it adds a little bit of layer. It's easier to understand. You have the patterns and you have the labels, which really help your students, and it is more accessible. And then our last one, truly, this is the best option that you could give students. Is it boring? Sort of, but your students, it's more accessible for them, and they can take this material no matter what kind of learner they are and understand it.
Yeah, so even with the patterns, it does make it better if you're trying to like copy something and print it. Like it makes sense to do that, except we talked before about keeping things simple and not so busy. So a student, say with ADD, might look at this and have a hard time concentrating on one versus the other. They'd be focusing more on the patterns than the data. But in something like this, we take that away.
And then going back 2 slides, not even just thinking of our students that are colorblind, a lot of times we print out notes and don't even think about it. Maybe it's in a packet. And if you print this out, this is what the students are going to see. So that would affect any of your students.
So, or say ones that have accommodations for needing things printed and given to them. This would make it difficult for them. But this one copies very easily.
Yes.
And it uses a lot less ink too.
Yes.
Oh, yeah. So before I talked about high contrast, and that's what I mean by it, just having as the biggest difference between color as possible. So when we're talking about Canvas or any kind of LMS, most of them only allow you to use a white background, and there's a reason for that. But just using black text is really helpful. So they do give you the option. They have those editors that allow you to change the font colors and all that. If you're trying to add some color, choose a consistent one. Choose a specific color that you're going to use for every heading. Don't make the body text a color. It should be black. But if you want to choose a specific color for headings, that's a way that you can spice it up. But like I said, stay consistent. It'll also help them as well. So if you do choose a color for headings, then after the students get used to the way that you're formatting your page, they're able to track things better. So they're actually able to create patterns because they say, oh, the blue means a new subject or a new part. So that is helpful as well. But just remember to keep it very legible, very easily readable. But you don't want to use anything that's like bright or neon or anything like that. So if you're including images in Canvas, you want to just use ones that are simple. I'm going to show you an example of what this looks like. I know we've talked about contrast a lot, but that's important when it comes to color. But look at this one here. So this is an example of some buttons that somebody used in their LMS. First, they used a gradient as the background at the top, and that could be problematic for a lot of people, especially before you saw some examples of how some colorblind people might view. So that would make that hard for them to read. Also, if you're looking at the buttons themselves, some of them have high contrast, but other ones are difficult to read. So again, when you have those color differences or screen differences or whatever it might be, it's harder to view. So this is what it could look like instead. If they wanted, say, a round button with some color on it, there's still a lot of contrast there, but it's simple. So they can still make it look nice without making it inaccessible for students. Right, so these are the colors to avoid. Green.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so
you
we have green and red, obviously, that applies to our students that are colorblind. I know we're getting close to the holidays, and that's a favorite of a lot of teachers to use that green and red. But it is very difficult for our students that are colorblind to decipher and understand that. Low contrast, as we've talked about, contrast is so important, and readability. And then random use of colors, it does affect attention, like we talked about. They're kind of looking around instead of focusing where they need to be. If you really need to change the font, it's better to use bolds and use the bold feature than it is to change the actual color.
Also something important anytime that we're teaching, we're referencing things, right? That we're showing them, we're talking about it. If you say something like, just go to the red link or just go to the blue page, that's not always helpful. So having like specific text that really explains what they're looking for is always better than referencing color. So use it, but don't make it the main point of your lesson. Don't base any lesson off of color or any instructions off of color. Just a side note. So we're going to be talking about text. That's the second most important. So color and text, those are the two big ones when it comes to education because we use them both so much. So the text is a big one. When it comes to the text, and I'm so guilty of it. I love fonts, guys. I love them. I love making things look pretty. It's actually like people used to send me things, they make it pretty, and I'd always use really, I mean, they're pretty to me, right? Yeah. KG fonts, my favorite. They still are, but you should really minimize the number of fonts that you decide to use and just choose one. Make it your font. Choose something that you're going to use and you're just going to continue to use. Nothing that you design should have more than 1 to 3 fonts, ideally 2. So some people like to use a certain font for their headings and then another font for any kind of body text and just keep it at that. That's a good way to keep it simple. Again, minimize distractions. And if you need to emphasize, like Chelsea had said before, just use those bolds or underlines that you need to.
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with using color to emphasize. I make fill in the blank notes for my students. And on the slide, I make what they need to fill in red, but I also bold and underlined it. So there's lots of ways that they know this is the word I need to fill in. So it's red, it's bold, and it's underlined. So all of my students can look at one of those 3 things to identify what it is.
So the idea is to reach all readers, make sure all readers have the ability to read what you're putting up there.
And up there where it says avoiding all caps, we actually gave a similar presentation at our school, and we have a teacher who is dyslexic, and they came up to us afterwards and said how difficult it is for them to read things that are in all caps. And we're kind of guilty of that. We've made a lot of
The
resources for our
guiltiest.
school, and the headings are all caps, and there's all caps used throughout. So it was a real eye opener for us to hear it from a staff member. So we think a lot of times about designing for our students, but if we're designing stuff for adults, we also have to recognize that we need to make sure that the resources are accessible.
So think about like things you send home to parents and things like that too. When it comes to all caps, it doesn't necessarily mean you're typing like an angry person either. A lot of the really fancy fonts are only all caps and they look really good, but they are difficult to read, especially for people with learning differences. Also just make it bigger. The biggest you can make your font, the best. So 18 points or higher. Now this is a really big screen, but the kids don't always have that. And it also gets really bogged down if you have a lot of small text. So we'll talk about that in a second. Also, as long as we're talking about English, keeping things to the left. Notice I haven't centered anything in this slide or any of my slides. Keeping things to the left makes it easier for students to read, especially for certain disabilities. It might not seem like anything if you have it centered, but it can make it very difficult for certain people to read anything that is centered. And it also keeps it nice and uniform and aligned as well, which is pleasing to the eye. All right, so I'm going to show you an example that our 8th graders would love. So this is an example of a font not to use. For tacos and anywhere I'd want to go.
Class would be over. If I put that up on the slide at the top, the class would be over.
Yeah.
It'd be very short.
That's why we teach middle school, because we love the middle school jokes. So yeah.
In addition, we have the next one, it just gets worse. So brace yourself.
It does. This one actually made the news. If you want to Google some at your own discretion, there's some really good ones out there, but we are only providing two. So this one is supposed to say my favorite color is glitter.
That's so Hitler.
So this is actually a product sold, I believe, at Nordstrom's. So it was online at Nordstrom's. It's in the news.
Yeah, not good.
But
First of all, there's a couple of faux pas here. One, they use glitter font. So if we were as educators, that's a no-no for sure. Glitter is like the ultimate distraction in every sense of glitter.
the way in black contrast works, but the rest of it is a no.
Right, and then they use a cursive. Not only did it not track well, but it also would be very difficult because if anybody teaches students, the first time you put something up in cursive, what do they say?
I can't
read cursive. So it's also not a good one. And not only that, even if they could, it still makes it difficult for dyslexic people to read and other people or people who are learning English. That could be difficult as well. So again, we're considering all of our learners when it comes to the font choices that we make. That first one up top, it says my favorite color is, looks really good. It's nice and aligned. It's black and white. But what's wrong with it? It's all caps, yeah. So great for a bag, not great for our students. All right, so,
Well, that one's not so great for a bag either.
No.
well, I mean, I meant the top part. But absolutely. So obviously, the whole point when it comes to text is readability. So I put up a bunch of things up there just to prove the point. These are all things that we shouldn't use. So when it comes to readability, like right up there, that one, people do that all the time where they kind of just let it keep tracking down the page. And while it might look cool for some like design posters or something, we can't do that as teachers. The students just can't read that, but also they can't read cursive. And even if they could, it could be difficult for them to read. So,
Is that one upside down?
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I was making a point. I'm glad you found it.
It's like a Where's Waldo.
Yeah. Find all the mistakes. So when it comes to font, there's actually two types of fonts. We're gonna like lightly get into it, but just so you know what it means, you might have seen some of these words before. Talked about not using like script or cursive. Handwriting is also another one. Don't use the handwriting fonts. They're super fun. You see it all the time in elementary stuff. My daughter brings them home a lot, and luckily she has no problem with it. But I'll look at it and I'll say, oh no, there's gonna be a kid who can't read that. And for especially emerging readers, that could be really, really detrimental to them. So we're gonna look at two different types of fonts. We're gonna look at serif and sans serif. I've never heard somebody say those words out loud. So if anybody knows if I'm pronouncing it incorrectly, please let me know. Is it correct? Okay.
You're correct.
And one thing is a sans serif font that a lot of us dread, but is actually really good for our elementary age students is Comic Sans. As much as it makes us shudder, we don't want to use it. It's readable for our students and accessible. And actually our teacher that is dyslexic at our school actually told us he prefers that it's easier for him to read and comprehend.
So this is what those two things look like.
Oh, okay. So the serif fonts, I'm sure we have kind of a basis on what those are. Those are slightly fancier fonts. They're great in larger text. So that's why when you pass out a passage to your students or a story for them to read, it's usually in some form of Times Roman or serif font. So it's really great for your longer body on your LMS. So your About Me page, if you have things there, but your sans serif fonts, they're great for your headings to be used there. They're more block-like, less decorative, and like it says up there, good for headers and titles. And in just a moment, we're going to give you a list of the best fonts to use according to research.
So also as a teacher, I don't want to be always thinking about which font should I use for this thing, right? Like you can get bogged down just in that. And so if you're going to choose one that you're going to use consistently, I recommend a sans serif because that way it could be the same in your LMS, like Canvas or whatever, as it is in any other product that you create.
We went through a training one time and they talked about having a signature font. So decide which one you want to stick with. That way, you know, all of your notes, all of your PowerPoints, all of your materials use the same consistent font choice. So your students can have a better grasp of what they're looking at.
This is just an example of what makes it serif or sans serif. Serif, I believe, is referring to the little flares. So if it doesn't have them.
You think about it, serif is like, it has feet.
Yeah.
So sans serif
Oh.
without feet,
Okay,
you take it away.
I like that, yeah.
Wall's worth your book. Thank you.
Oh, and I'll put up those lists of text or fonts in a minute, but I just want to explain why. So I've talked about a lot of this already, but there is a lot of research and it is in the Wakelet as well. But other things that you should know, being text heavy is never a good thing. So a bunch of text all at once, it's not helpful. If your kids need to read a passage, great, but chunking it down is always best. So a paragraph at a time, or increasing the space between the lines, et cetera, it makes it a lot easier for them to read. If you use Canvas or another LMS and you present like pages in a module, you want to break down those pages into a bunch of separate ones versus all in one big one. So that increases readability and their ability to pay attention, their ability to retain, all of things. So it's good to just use the space available, but don't overuse it. And the same goes for presentations. Like actually this slide bothered me. It has way too much text on it, but for the sake of speed, I put it up there, but I wouldn't do it for your students. And this is just so that you have the info. So I believe this is the font, yeah. So those are your font choices that work the best. I'm not using any one of those. I'm using Quicksand. That's my signature font, but it's only on Google. But those are some good ones. Yeah, feel free to take pictures of any of the slides, guys, if you want to. But Verdana or Verdana, that's available on basically everything. So that's a good one. And there's a lot of research behind that particular font in general. And it's known to be one of the best fonts you can use with your students. Which one? The first one. Yeah. Yep. And you can use that on any word processor or slide. It's available everywhere.
Is there like a font that's like specifically been developed for dyslexia?
That would be awesome. I don't know.
Because I know that you can buy like books that are like in a dyslexic friendly font.
I did not know that.
Yeah.
I thought it was Lexend, Lexend, and then it has.
Learning today.
Yeah, I think DECA was the one. They have
Yeah,
a
I
whole
mean, you
bunch
can
of
go like
different.
on like because my niece is just diagnosed with
Yeah.
dyslexia, so I just sent them all like a bunch of
That's so
dyslexia
cool.
friendly font books.
Well,
But,
feel
like,
free to
there's like a
chime in if you don't
dyslexic
cover
font too. So
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm glad.
I don't know that it's like available on like I don't know if it's available like
Yeah.
on our regular sort of
Yeah, because
applications.
there's people who reach adulthood and don't find out until then that they're dyslexic. And so just because you might not have an IEP or a 504 for somebody with dyslexia doesn't mean they don't have it. My aunt was the superintendent of our schools and learned at 55 that she was dyslexic. So she was like, oh, I just thought I was, really slow. I felt so bad. Slow, like at reading. All right. So like I said before, keep it small, keep it simple. Think about everybody and stay away from those script fonts as charming as they can be for certain things. It's just not for us in education. All right, pictures.
All right, so the biggest thing with pictures is sometimes as educators, we want to add in cute pictures to get our students excited or clip art, but it doesn't really help our students learn the material. So you want to make sure that any image that you put on there is relevant to the content that is matching the slide. So the content the image should match the content. And you also want to be consistent with icons or graphics. There are websites out there where you can pull graphics and you can change the color for all the graphics so they match throughout.
It's in the booklet.
Yeah, and that's on the, yes. And then you also want to avoid clutter, which is something that I know that I'm guilty of. I want a smaller slide deck instead of a longer one sometimes, just to go through quickly with my students. And I clutter up the page and then my students don't know where they're looking. So I've really this year gone to trying to put 1 or 2 things per slide and really gone through and edited all of my things. A big one that, is really important is aiming for diversity and representation. And making sure that if you are using images, that those images reflect all of your students. And that there are also, I think we added to the wiki also a website that does a great job with putting multicultural images in there from artists that represent everyone.
Yeah. So
Of course, we all know accessibility when using alt text, making sure you have that in there. It's an added step, but it only takes a few seconds, and making sure all of your teachers are doing that as well.
and if you're not familiar with that, it's short for, I believe, alternative text. And you can right click on any image that you add to something and there will be an option depending on the platform for adding it. And all that does is allow the students to use a screen reader. It'll read what is in that image. So you would just describe what that image has in it with as much detail as possible. Because if you're only using images that are relevant to your content, then they should know what that is as well. So even if they're unable to see, you also have to think about, it's not just the students, but the people who help your students, the people at home, the people who might be providing them services or whatever it might be, they might need that alt text. So it's not just about what you know, it's about what you don't know as well. Sorry.
And a lot of programs now, PowerPoint, even Canvas, the LMS, they have accessibility checkers, really simple to just click and see what the issues are, and they'll address those for you so you can make those changes. I one time had a PowerPoint that I've been using for years, and when I found out about the accessibility checker, boom, 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 50 things I had to change. And it was just the reality that, you know, we can always make things better and we need to be more mindful of our design and are we helping students.
Absolutely.
And then this last one here, I'm very guilty of avoiding using images of text. It's very easy to Google a chart and place that into your slide.
They copy and paste a screenshot.
Yeah, pros and cons. But it really is best to try to replicate that material as best you can, instead of putting that chart in as an image.
Absolutely. So these are like some of the different types of images that you could add. They all have their benefits and drawbacks. When it comes to actual photos, those are really great because say you're teaching about, I don't know, the Manassas battlefield. Providing a photo of the Manassas battlefield that you're talking about helps make connections for the students. It's actually really beneficial for them. Science even proves that there's a lot of retention that happens there because of that image. So as opposed to just text alone. So those are really helpful and they can provide a lot of context for whatever you're talking about. And it helps you cut down on the text. Instead of describing it, if you show them, you're not only saving room on your slide and decreasing distraction, but you're also helping with retention. But then you have your clip art that's more informal. It can be really fun. I recommend if you're going to use clip art to stick to like a certain style and just keep that, like make that like your thing. So there is, like we were talking about before, we put something in the Wakelet for a lot of open source clip art that you can use freely in your lessons.
And something I picked up yesterday from another session is, I'm not sure if anyone's using Canva to design. So in Canva, if you find an image that you like, they give you the artist and you can put the artist into the search and then all of their artwork will pop up. So that could keep it consistent, having that same artist.
I did not know that.
I thought that was
Thank
really
you.
good.
So clip art's really easy to find. I don't recommend using Google to find clip art because we want to be modeling digital citizenship for our students. And a lot of clip art is not open source. It is owned by the artist. So you want to use websites that give those open source images to you so you're not violating any copyright issues. Icons, I love using icons because they're simple. So if you didn't notice, I've been using them, you can see the bottom right hand of the screen, to represent certain things. It draws the eye to certain information. Our eyes are naturally drawn to certain things on a screen, and icons have been proven to be really effective of that. So they're helpful to use and they're simple, so they take away from distraction, but it doesn't always accomplish what you're looking for. So if you're trying to show a concept, one of the first one or the graphs might be a better choice for you. But graphs are really, really beneficial for your students. Just have to be mindful of how you present them, the color and the text choices. But they're a great way to explain information. So when we're talking about images, that's mostly what we're talking about. So these are just some facts. All that research is in the Wakelet as well, but it just shows how powerful images can be in the learning process. And so we just want to be mindful of what we choose and why we choose them. But it helps with retention. It helps with remembering and reading faster for the students, which is really helpful. And just being able to engage with what they're learning. So I have a third grade daughter. I'm thinking about her sitting here looking at this and there's no chance she'd read that. Obviously she can, but she wouldn't. But if it was represented in different ways, she'd absorb it pretty quickly and she could tell me all about it. So it's beneficial to both younger and older students. So just make sure whatever you use, they can see it. So if you're copying and pasting from Google, a lot of times it's grainy. That doesn't help anybody. So trying to find something that actually works. There's search features. So if you use like a slide deck program like PowerPoint or Google, they have search features where you can find really clear images that you could just pop right in there. Just whatever you use, just keep it simple.
The bottom one there, using with purpose, I had a coworker, and I know he'll be saying this, but he used to hide like a raccoon in his presentations, just like a little image of a raccoon. And the kids would be so obsessed with looking for that images in the slides that they would miss all the material. And it wasn't until I kind of brought up to him, like, are your kids retaining the information, or are they more worried about this image they're searching for during the time you're presenting? Because one time a student was like, oh yeah, I spent all class. And I said, what did you learn? And he's like, the raccoon was on slide 5. I was like, no. So make sure those images are relevant to your presentation. Although it's
It
fun,
is funny.
it's fun and it's engaging, but it's taking away from the goal of what you're trying to do, which is to teach them the content.
I can see how you could work that into a particular lesson.
Yes.
It'd be fun for them, but. So this hurts my soul. I don't even know what it says, to be honest. What is IoT, I guess, Internet of Things. But anyway, this is what not to do. So but in the slide before, I talked about using transparent backgrounds. You see that guy who's like scratching his head with the question mark, how he has that white background. Not only does it not look clean as far as design goes, but it's also just not a best practice. So if it didn't have the transparent background, you'd hardly be able to see him because the background's blue. But all of this is just, it's a lot, right? So you just want to clean it up, keep it clean. If you are searching for images, you can add the word transparent background to whatever you're searching for, and you'll find a lot better options that way. Here's another example. Oh no, okay. So when it comes to your LMS, the principles are the same when it comes to images. So you just want to make sure you use that alt text that you're using with purpose. So it's basically the same as it is for presentations. Not much changes there. I like to keep whatever images I use in the same general location so students know what to expect. So if I'm giving like text, then I always have the image below. And so I'm not like up top this time, to the right this time, and left this time, just keeping that consistent flow, just so they know what to expect. And knowing what to expect for students, especially particular students with certain learning disabilities, can actually be really beneficial. So just knowing that they can look at what you have and know where to look can be soothing, whether they realize it or not. So this is an example of a very text-heavy slide. It has a lot of info on there, and it's good info, but there's complete sentences, paragraphs even in each bullet. While that might be a good way to get all the info, maybe like a brain dump, this is what it could look like if you cleaned it up. Same info, but presented in a much cleaner way. And I would still argue that there are some changes that you could make there. You can make the text a lot bigger at the bottom. I'd probably avoid the red and the blue. So from a design standpoint, this looks nice. From an educational design standpoint, it still could use some work, but it's a lot better than the first one.
And we didn't talk about that color combination earlier. Red and blue is another one of those ones you want to shy away from.
Yeah.
As a former civics teacher, I'm guilty of that as well. But it is one of it, just like red and green, it's very difficult for students to decide.
All right, and you can refer back to this. These were just some ideas of the ways to use images in a purposeful way.